The eyes of the nation are on Arizona.
A week after the Supreme Court upheld the 1864 territorial abortion law, the effort to repeal the ban is at a standstill. We'll talk to a leading supporter of the law and one of the activists working to overturn it. And a state lawmaker ends his bid for re-election and could face criminal charges, suspected of forging signatures to get on the ballot. Our panel weighs in next on Politics Unplugged.
And good evening. I'm political editor Dennis Welch. This is Politics Unplugged, and the move to repeal the territorial abortion law brought to a quick halt in the legislature this week, and they're in recess until Wednesday. So what are the odds it remains in place at least until the November elections? Joining us now to talk about that is Cathi Herrod, the president of the Center for Arizona Policy, a staunch supporter of that law. Thank you very much for joining us here today. And I do want to start with you. Obviously, you were the one who lobbied for that 15-week ban that kind of cleared the way for this to reinstate the pre-Roe law. I understand that. What has been your reaction to this week as we are seeing some Republicans say that they would like to repeal that law that dates back to the territorial days, but yet, and we'll get into the specifics of this later, they won't vote against the speaker to make that vote happen, but you're hearing Republicans say, like, yeah, we think that law goes too far.
We've called on Republican lawmakers who have made pro-life commitments who, when they were elected, said that they were pro-life, said that they would oppose abortion unless necessary to prevent the death of the mother. We've called on them to hold their word. Have
you had conversations with any of them?
You know me, I don't talk about any conversations I've had with members, but we have called on all of those who have said they are pro-life to keep their word to the voters, to their constituents.
Yeah, okay, well, I guess, you'll probably say the same thing because, what are the conversations you are having with the Senate President, Ben Toma, with Warren Peterson? These are the guys, the lawmakers that really control what's going on the floor and whether or not this will even get a vote at this point.
Well, in general, to everyone, I would say that this issue is about protecting the lives of unborn children and sparing their mothers the heartache and tragedy of abortion. So that's the fundamental issue that we're talking about. It's not about politics. It's about the morality of, are we going to protect unborn children from abortion, and are we going to protect their mothers when we know there are consequences of having an abortion?
But why not support at least repealing that law, the older law, reinstating the 15-week ban, and maybe even include exceptions for rape and incest? Why wouldn't you want to do that?
Well, because we believe that the law that's on the books that the Arizona Supreme Court upheld, that lawmakers have never repealed it. We do not see a need to repeal it, and that's the law that protects unborn children and their mothers.
But people say, look, it criminalizes doctors and people who help women get health care that they may or may not need. What would you say to them when they say this goes too far? You're criminalizing people who are helping women get necessary, in many cases, health care that they need.
Well, if a doctor breaks the law and there's a criminal penalty, then the doctor should be punished, and that goes for any issue that's out there. This law does not criminalize women, and we need to make that very clear because that's gotten lost in some of the stories.
But it does criminalize doctors and people who want to help.
Well, but it's, again, if you break the law, there are criminal penalties for that. Mm-hmm. And so that is justified, that's who should be appropriately punished, is if a doctor breaks the law and provides an abortion, even now, past the 15-week limit, whatever it might be, that, doctors, all of us are subject to the criminal laws if we break the law.
Mm-hmm. Why not try to push for at least exceptions for rape and incest on this?
That's an issue that's would be up to the legislature.
Would you support that?
I would not oppose a rape and incest exception, but let's look at the reality here. Do we have a governor who would sign a law that allowed a rape and incest exception? No one talks about that. I think that's a significant question. What would the Democrats and a governor do on a rape and incest exception? We also have to always note that abortions due to rape and incest are a very small number, maybe 1%.
It's still, and I've heard this argument before, but that is a tragedy. I think
it is, absolutely.
Don't you think would want to avoid at any cost, even if it's only one, not just 1%, but one?
It's a tragedy for any woman who has been a victim of rape or incest, absolutely. And my heart goes out to any woman who's been in that situation.
Okay, so again, what kinds of actions are you prepared to take if anybody doesn't hold the line on this? I've seen your political arm of the group in action in the past. What kinds of things, what kind of actions will you be taking on this?
We've not made any decisions on endorsements for this election year. Our focus is really on ensuring that Arizona voters know just how far the so-called abortion access amendment goes, and that what's in that amendment does not reflect the voters of Arizona, the opinions of Arizonans. So our focus is primarily on that. What we do on endorsements remains to be seen. No, had not even really thought about endorsements yet.
Okay, and also given your conversations that you don't want to talk about with lawmakers and leaders, what's your expectation? Because it seems like they're coming back every Wednesday. The legislature's on a one-day work week. That happens to be Wednesday. What's your expectation this coming week? Do you think you're going to see any movement on this? Or do you expect that the legislature will sine die this year without repealing that older pre-Roe law?
Just like I try to not predict what judges will do, I don't try to predict what lawmakers might do on this. I think the pressure is certainly significant on both sides. So we'll see if they can get the 31st vote in the House this week or not.
Okay, and let's move on now. There's also the Arizona abortion access ballot measure that looks like it's going to get to the ballot. They claim they've already have enough signatures to get on that ballot. What's the strategy for you to oppose that measure if and when it gets to the ballot?
Well, of course, I'm here on behalf of Center for Arizona Policy or Center for Arizona Policy Action. Not that it goes too far campaign, but we will urge voters to look at the language of that amendment. It grants a fundamental right to every individual to an abortion. That means your 14-year-old daughter could have an abortion without the mom or dad knowing about it. It also prevents punishing any sex trafficker or sex abuser who takes the 14-year-old to get an abortion to cover up his crime. So I believe when you look at the specifics of that it truly allows abortions, late-term abortions. The exceptions are broad exemptions, broad exceptions. And so really the amendment is unrestricted, unregulated abortion. That's not right, certainly for unborn children. Neither is it right for the women of Arizona.
But it seems like you look at poll after poll that, Americans, Arizonans want access to abortion. Current law that's set to take place probably in June, that pre-Roe law set to be reinstated, doesn't really allow for that. You're opposing a ballot initiative that would give people access to abortion. Don't you feel like you're, fighting against the will of the people?
Well, 70 to 80% of the people also support reasonable restrictions, common sense safeguards on abortion, and the so-called abortion access.
Those safeguards aren't on the books right now.
Well, they are on the books right now. We've got the 15-week limit and those
no exception for rape and incest. Well, we already talked about that.
We have already talked about that. But I think when Arizonans realize that the so-called abortion access amendment does not reflect their views either, that they will vote it down. Again, it's unrestricted, unregulated abortion. A good 70 to 80% of Arizonans support the common sense restrictions on abortion.
All right, I want to thank you very much for stopping by here. I know it's a busy week.
Thank you.
And still ahead, we'll hear from the other side, an activist working to repeal this law and protect abortion rights in the state constitution. When Politics Unplugged continues. Welcome back to Politics Unplugged. Now let's get the other side of this debate. Activists were at the Capitol this week pushing to see the 1864 law repealed. Among them, our next guest, Chris Love, the spokeswoman for the Arizona for Abortion Access campaign. I want to thank you very much for taking some time out to join us here today. And we haven't spoken to you since that court ruling came down a couple of weeks ago. First of all, let's start there. What was the reaction from that? Were you surprised at all?
We had prepared ourselves for all possibilities, but I think I described it that day as a gut punch, right? It was devastating that in 2024, our Arizona Supreme Court would uphold a total ban from 1864 when my ancestors were slaves, when a black woman like myself couldn't vote. That's the law of the land now is it's unfathomable.
Yeah, and what's been the reaction now? You're with this campaign. You're trying to get this campaign to the ballot. About a week before this court ruling came down, you guys announced that you had 500,000, 500,000 signatures to get this issue to the ballot. You only needed 383,000 and some change for that. What's been the reaction since then? I would imagine you've seen an uptick or an increase, a boost maybe from people wanting to sign and get this thing to the ballot.
Well, I think that Arizonans are, again, upset with the decision of the court last week on Tuesday. And so anyone who had been kind of waiting on the sidelines to see what would happen, they're in the game now. So we've seen an uptick in everything, signatures and volunteers who want to circulate petitions and donations. I think that Arizonans are mad as hell, quite frankly, and they truly want to see this on the ballot, right?
And what's been your what's your take now? You've been down at the Capitol. I saw you once down there this week. You want them to repeal this antiquated law. It doesn't include exceptions for rape and incest. It's only the only exception is when the life of the mother is at risk. What do you think for what you're seeing from some of the Republicans? It seems like they're speaking out of both sides of their mouth. On one hand, there's a few Republicans that say, yes, let's repeal this. It goes too far. On the other hand, they don't want to stand up, at least in the House, of their Speaker to even allow a vote to repeal to happen.
You know, I would say one day without abortion access in this state is one day too many, so we would hope for a repeal. But quite frankly, all of those folks are on the record repeatedly stating their support for the 1864 ban. You know, some of them voted for the 15-week ban that included language that intentionally didn't repeal the 1864 ban. I think that they understand what the political headwinds are for them. Quite frankly, you know, in swing districts, this is going to be an issue for folks that hold offices in swing districts. But it shows that their position is so unpopular and wildly out of step with Arizona voters. You know, we have a broad coalition of Arizona voters who agree that, you know, pregnant patients should have the freedom to make personal decisions about abortion, especially with their families and their medical providers. And they don't want the yahoos in the legislature to make those decisions, or courts.
And we just had Cathi Herrod on. Obviously, she's got influence with Republican lawmakers, particularly in primary elections. She has a lot of sway in her organization. Other than holding rallies at the Capitol, is there anything that your campaign, people who want to repeal this, what they can do to try to move some of these lawmakers who are reluctant at this point to take the steps to repeal this law?
Right. So I think that there are plenty of organizations that are out there that are carrying that water for us. Our campaign is really focused on getting on the ballot. So we're doing the things that we need to do to ensure that we make the ballot in November. You know, we're collecting more than twice the amount of signatures that we would need to qualify. So we plan to turn that many in July, right? And then just wait through the line by line signature challenges that we expect to come, which is why we're collecting, you know, more than double the number, so that we can almost guarantee that we make the ballot in November.
And you know, I don't want to get too, just raw politics on this, but you've probably heard this. You know, people say, like, why would you want to, politically, for political reasons, have this law repealed? If the legislature were to come back, say, repeal this law, reinstate the 15-week ban, maybe even include exceptions for rape and incest, wouldn't that take some momentum away from your effort to try to enshrine protections in the Constitution?
You know, our effort is powered by a bunch of repro-focused organizations. And so we view that any ban is terrible for the people of Arizona, right? So we would take a repeal, absolutely. But any replacement wouldn't be as substantial as what we're trying to do in November.
Okay. And what are you expecting from it? You kind of heard a bit of a preview from Cathi on how they're going to try to fight your measure on this. One of the things I've heard from a lot of Republicans who don't agree with what you're trying to accomplish is they focus on the exception for the life of the mother. You've heard a lot about this. They say it opens up to late-term abortions, all these other things. I just want to hear your side. Can you explain why that exception was included?
So I think for us, our language includes a viability limit. It's in the language in our one page, right? I think that is what most Arizonans and Americans are used to, because that was the status quo for about 50 years before the Supreme Court decided the Dobbs decision, right? So there's nothing out of the ordinary about what we're trying to do here. Americans understand it. Arizonans understand it. And I think that some of the things that, Cathi and her friends are saying are just the classic fear-mongering that they've been doing for the last 2 decades or so. It didn't work in Michigan, it didn't work in Ohio, and it's certainly not going to work in November for Arizona voters.
Yeah, and it's also worth pointing out that, like, late-term abortions are very rare.
Right.
93%, I believe, of abortions in Arizona happen before 15 weeks. And the ones you see after that, normally, from what I understand, is because something went wrong with the pregnancy.
Right, and we believe that even if that law protects 93% of Arizonans who are pregnant. We believe that all pregnant Arizonans deserve the freedom to choose what happens with their pregnancies, right? And if we're leaving one Arizonan behind, that's too many. And in those circumstances, I would say, why wouldn't we include that small percentage of pregnant Arizonans? They need us the most.
Okay. And I just want to finish up here. Last question. Just go back to what we can expect from the legislature moving forward. Do you think there'll be a change down there in the attitude from some of the Republicans down there? Do you expect this to be repealed before the legislature sine die adjourns for the year?
If I were a betting woman on the Arizona legislature, I would have lost a lot of money. So I'm not in that business. I do know what their plan is, or rather their scam is, but we're moving forward and we're prepared to take it to the ballot.
All right, thank you very much. And coming up next, I'll be bringing in our panel to talk about all of this week's major headlines and the accusation that a state lawmaker forged signatures to get on the ballot. That's next on Politics Unplugged. And welcome back to Politics Unplugged. State Representative Austin Smith is ending his run for re-election amid accusations that he forged signatures to qualify for the ballot. And here to talk about that and the rest of this week's headlines, political consultants Barrett Marson and Herrera. Thank you for being here. I know you've been chomping at the bit. You've been talking the entire time here. Let's start with you, Barrett.
I talk for a living. I get paid by the word.
Let's talk a little bit about Austin Smith. What makes this a story is that he's been one of the loudest voices screaming about election fraud without any baseless claims of election fraud. And guess what? And he also sits on the House Committee for Election Oversight. Let's get your reaction from that.
Well, I'll tell you, Austin Smith finally found election fraud, and it's right in his own home. Now, my problem is Austin Smith, of course, hasn't acknowledged it.
Allegedly.
He has not, but he has decided to not run. And by the time your viewers are seeing this, he might have resigned from the legislature. So Austin Smith is in a world of pain, and it's brought to you by Roy Herrera.
And we're getting to that right now because Roy Herrera, not only do you come on the show frequently to provide your excellent punditry from the left, you're also the attorney in this case. You were the one that brought these allegations forward. What happened?
Well, I mean, obviously, I stand by the allegations in the complaint that we filed, and I think it was prudent for Mr. Smith to withdraw his candidacy, which he did, as a result of the challenge. We have nothing to do with the referral that the SOS made with to the Attorney General's office. You know, in America, you have the ability to defend yourself. He's going to have that same chance to explain, assuming there's an investigation, to explain what occurred. Mm-hmm. But I would say, generally speaking, if you're a candidate running for office, you need to be very careful with the petitions that you turn in because they're going to be scrutinized.
And particularly when you're the one also screaming about election fraud.
When you scrutinize, have you gotten like a handwriting expert, or are you just eyeballing it going, this looks really bad?
Sometimes those kinds of experts are retained. Sometimes things just look bad, right? And then you investigate that way.
Okay. Well, now, you've predicted a resignation, even before this show airs on Sunday night, that he could have resigned. Let's say that does happen. What would that do in the legislature? Because we're razor-thin margins down there between Republicans, Democrats. Republicans hold a one-seat advantage down there, and Republicans are also trying to hold off a repeal vote on that abortion law we've been talking about.
Dennis,
what happens?
I predict chaos. Raining, cats, dogs, everything. It will literally be chaos because you know what? The Republicans will not be able to move anything without the 31, without a bipartisan, right? Thankfully, most of the bills are done for the season, for this session. But Democrats are going to have Republicans would have a hard time moving anything. But where it really, really could make a huge difference, and I'm sure we're going to talk about this later, is in the abortion debate. Because to change a rule, you need the majority. And now if there's only 59 members and you have 30 votes, I'm no math genius, but 30 beats 50 minus 29. All right, so you could now change the rules of and bring forward the Stahl-Hamilton bill, or maybe the Senate bill if it comes over, and then get that on the floor and do the votes. One thing I do want to say about Austin, though, he either works or worked for Turning Point, which everyone talks about Turning Point. Everyone knows what they do, and they've gotten a lot of write-ups about having $100 million effort to go for a get out the vote effort. Right? You're going to trust a $100 million effort to people who couldn't even get 500 signatures, valid, non-fraudulent signatures, to get allegedly to get one of your people onto the ballot. That is a problem for Turning Point. And I know one media outlet has reported that he resigned from Turning Point, and that's very important for them to maintain some sort of dignity.
Okay, and these aren't the only signatures that are being challenged. In fact, they're not the only signatures that are being forwarded to the AG's office. You're involved in another case that's one Republican is accusing another Republican in an important Senate primary of some problems with the signatures. What's going on with this? And of course, we're speaking about Arizona Senator Wendy Rogers accusing David Cook of not actually qualifying or getting the proper signatures to qualify for the ballot.
Well, that case, like several other cases, are still going through the process. Everything is done in a very expedited fashion, right? So next week, you're going to see a number of trials in a number of cases. We have seen, I think, in a lot of cases, accusations of, fraud and things like that. A lot of times they're unfounded, right? The person is able to defend those accusations, and sometimes they're not, and that's what this process is set up for. But like I said earlier, I stand by sort of the general sentiment, which is that especially these days, when this is so litigious, you have got to be very careful if you're a candidate in what you submit.
What goes into all these? You're involved in several of them. They must be time intensive.
It's time intensive, it's detail oriented. Obviously, all of us in the election law bar are very busy right now trying to get these cases adjudicated. Sometimes they are voluntarily dismissed as a result of a withdrawal, like we've seen. But other times we have to go to court and have a judge rule.
And again, you're representing the Republican David Cook in this case. I want to ask you too, is it normal to see cases forwarded to the Attorney General's office for a review?
I think that's more unusual. I mean, I'm sure of thinking in prior cycles whether that actually occurred or not, and I can't really think of that happening. Now, that being said, this could be just the position of the Secretary of State office to refer, any kind of allegations like that in any case, whether they're founded or unfounded, to the Attorney General, and then the Attorney General will then make a decision. That might be a policy now for this new Secretary of State, but it is something that is different, I think, than what I've seen in the past.
And so many cases are a result of just laziness, not necessarily fraud that we allegedly saw, say, in
That's exactly right.
Some of it's just laziness.
Some of it's not forging signatures. Some of it could just be that they didn't check to make sure that the person who signed the ballot's an actual registered voter, those kinds of things.
Yeah, sometimes it's just bad handwriting. I mean, that happens oftentimes too.
Well, let's pivot away. Let's pivot back to the big issue of the week, abortion. I got to ask you, as the Republican, why wouldn't the GOP come back and want to repeal this law? And then maybe even put and keep the 15-week ban in place with some exceptions for rape and incest. Why wouldn't they want to do that?
My incredibly bad. If I put on, more the Republican hat and take away the political consultant hat, Republicans have wanted to limit abortion as much as possible for generations now. They have finally gotten that in Arizona. Stand by it, I say. Elections be damned. What do you go to Phoenix for? What do you go to the Capitol for, if not to create policy that you think your voters want to see? This is the policy that they think voters want to see. Stand by it. Now, that's not good election advice, by the way, but that is, for Republicans, and I think that's what many of them are doing.
Well, Barrett, you finally get the last word here. That's all the time we have this week. But be sure to join us next week for more Politics Unplugged. Good night.